In the guitar gear community, there's been a whole bunch of talk about this amp called the PositiveGrid Spark. And in today's video, I want to show you guys the pros and cons to see if it's actually worth it. Anyways, let's get right into it. In one of my previous videos that'll link up in the corner, I talked about the PositiveGrid Spark, just giving a brief little rundown of what it is, and I'm going to throw that clip in right here. The next amp I'm going to be talking about is the PositiveGrid Spark. If you follow guitar gear even a little bit, chances are you've probably heard of this amp. And that's for good reason. This incredibly versatile 40-watt amplifier can basically replicate any amp you want it to. If you want to replicate a vintage Marshall or a monster dual rectifier, but don't want to pay those hefty prices of tube amps, then the PositiveGrid Spark is a great option for you. You're able to jam along with drum machines and even play along with some of your favorite songs. The main selling point of the Spark is that you can connect it to an amp, and then switch out whatever amp you want. There are thousands of presets that people have uploaded to the Spark app. You can connect up to 4 presets, and this one right here is my favorite. It's safe to say that you won't be running out of options anytime soon. If you could only have one amp, then this amp would be a great choice. Now that you know what the PositiveGrid Spark is, let's get into a little bit of a deeper dive. Let's just start from the beginning of from why I originally got it. No, honestly, the original reason why I got it is because my monitor right here doesn't actually have any built-in speakers. So obviously, I wanted to be able to hear what I was watching on my screen, so I got this amp and use it as a soundbar. So obviously it's great to be able to hear whatever you're watching on the screen, and that's why I got this amp. Now obviously there's nothing wrong with just having a normal speaker, but being able to play guitar through your speaker system it's great. It was a great asset for me, and maybe that's something that you guys can use too. So just the ability to be able to use this amp as a soundbar is something great, and I think it's really useful. So again, that's why I originally ordered this amp, but that also leads us into our first con. Now it's quite annoying, but that's because this amp is in such high demand, so many people want this amp that it takes forever for it to arrive at your house. It won't really take as long for it to arrive if you order it through Sweetwater or Amazon like I did, but if you order it from the Spark app like my dad did, it takes around a month to arrive. And in today's day and age, that's pretty much just unacceptable with things like Amazon Prime showing people that you can ship things in about a day or two. But again, because everyone wants this amp and the demand is so high with it, it's going to take a lot longer for it to show up. But once it finally arrived, the first thing I noticed was how well made it was. It's pretty freaking heavy, especially for a practice amp, and it's built like a tank. So the build quality for the price is definitely, I'd say, a 10 out of 10. But now that we're talking about the physical amp itself, let's talk about some of its physical downsides. And probably the first and most obvious one is the power switch. The power switch in this amp is really thin and really hard to flick back and forth. My sister likes to come in my room and play Minecraft, and sometimes she has trouble turning on the speaker because it's just really hard to push back and forth. So if there is another version of the Spark that ever comes out, I think a nicer switch would be fantastic. Now that's not really the biggest problem in the world, but it's something that's quite annoying. Now I think I mentioned this pro in the clip where I was talking about what amp this was, but my favorite thing about this amp is the usability with headphones. Being able to plug in almost any headphone at nighttime, being able to play quietly is amazing. This is definitely my favorite thing about this amp. Now honestly, the only time I really use this amp as an amp is whenever I'm playing at nighttime and I don't want to bother anybody else. Now yeah, a lot of other amps you're able to use headphones with, but I think this one's just super easy. There's just a little headphone jack on the top of the amp that you just plug right into and you're ready to play. But since we're already here at the top of the amp, let's talk about these knobs. The knobs themselves are actually really nice quality, but let's be honest, I never use them. Because of the connectivity with the app, these knobs are basically useless. As soon as you connect the app, you're able to move the iPad or phone, whatever you use it with, pretty much anywhere with you. So just having to reach over to the amp is, there's really no point in doing it. But let's be honest, I'm definitely glad that they're here instead of not being there completely. And speaking of the app, let's talk about its connectivity. I've never really had any problems connecting a phone or a tablet to the Spark app. I think that the connectivity of the app to the amp is actually pretty great. That's pretty hard to say, app to the amp. But anyways, this app is extremely easy to use. It's very straightforward. It's super simple and self-explanatory. You'll be able to switch amps, switch pedals, switch anything you want. So yeah, this app is overall very well laid out, very well designed, and it's very easy to use. Now obviously, the most important part about this amp is how versatile it is. There's really no shortage of tonal options that you can have. Especially with the creation of the tone clad, which we'll get into later, there's so many different amp presets that people have made that you're able to play through. If you want to look up Guns N' Roses and play like Slash, go ahead, search it up, you'll be able to find it. Want to sound like Eric Johnson? Boom, there's an amp setting for him too. And of course there are many, many more. Millions more at that. But also being able to create your own tones and save them is honestly just as fun, if not even more fun. But let's be honest, in dialing in your own tone, you're going to find something that's just a little bit annoying. And yeah, this is kind of a nitpicky gripe, but the tone knobs are really hard to turn. The digital ones, of course. I feel that if you want to make a small adjustment, it's actually really hard to do, but as they are tone knobs, you don't really have to touch them very often. So once you get it, it's really not that big of a deal. That's why I say this is kind of a nitpicky gripe, because, you know, like I just said, once you get it in, you don't really have to touch it much. But yeah, these tone knobs are actually quite annoying, kind of hard to adjust. And now that we mentioned it before, let's get into the tone cloud. Like I said, there are thousands upon thousands of different presets that people have made. Like I said earlier in the video, if you want to play through a vintage Marshall, boom, there's tons of presets about vintage Marshalls. You want to play through a Vox AC30? Boom, there it is. Being able to play through all of these really cool amp settings is really awesome, especially with the touch of a finger. Though this amp isn't perfect, this is honestly why I think this amp is just so good, and I really think anyone could use it, honestly. Even if you have all of the real amps it's trying to replicate, being able to just switch them out on the fly is pretty dang easy. But of course, I would personally just rather have all of the real versions of the amp, but obviously, that's not really realistic. That's thousands upon thousands of dollars. So if you're not absolutely loaded with money, this amp is just amazing. The next cool thing about the Spark is that you're able to play along with different songs. You're able to connect it to Apple Music or Spotify and be able to play along with pretty much any song you want. I personally have never really used that feature, saying as number one, I don't have Apple Music or Spotify, and number two, it's connected to my computer, so if I want to play along with anything, I just go straight to YouTube. But for anyone that does pay for those services, that's going to be a fantastic feature to have. The next comment we have is that there's not very many pedals. As you can see here, there's only 10 drive pedals. No, yeah, that's kind of a lot, but in my opinion, the difference between each tone of each pedal isn't that big. And honestly, there's no real easy way to switch out each pedal. And what I mean by that is it's really hard to do on the fly. If you want to kick on the distortion pedal, you're going to have to reach all the way over to your iPad while playing, and then switch it on. Now yeah, this would be a lot more expensive, but if this amp came with some kind of a foot switch that you're able to just click on whatever pedal you wanted, it'd be a lot easier. But again, I can kind of see why they didn't do that, because that would definitely drive up the cost. But I honestly think that would be completely worth it. Now probably my least favorite thing about this amp, which isn't entirely the Spark's fault, especially for the price, and that is that it kind of lacks the life of a tube. Now if you don't know what that means, there are two different kinds of amps. There are solid state amplifiers and tube amplifiers. Tube amplifiers are the really expensive ones, and they sound quite a lot better in my opinion. That's what this amp is trying to replicate. And honestly, it doesn't do a bad job at all. It actually does a pretty dang good job. But like I said before, I think it kind of lacks that soul, lacks that life, that brightness of it. Now you'll get close to the tone that it's trying to replicate, but it's definitely not the same thing. But honestly, for the price of this amp, you really can't complain. Whew. Last two. The next con is definitely that this amp is more of a practice amp and not for performers. If you want to play live, something like a tube amp with a pedal board would be a lot better than this amp. Now that's definitely not what this amp is going for. It's definitely going for the practice musician's, best friend. Not exactly for a touring musician. But if you want a nice best friend to carry along with you on the road, this amp probably isn't the best option for it. But while I mentioned the practice amp, this is probably the best practice amp you can get, period. The amount of versatility you have with this thing and just the straight up bang to buck ratio, this amp, you really can't beat it with anything else. And that's why I think this amp is absolutely worth it. For around 250 bucks, it absolutely beats spending thousands upon thousands of dollars on the real amp counterparts. So personally, if I can only have one amp for the rest of my life, this would absolutely be it. And I feel like for just the sheer versatility, I feel like you can agree with me on that. But anyways, thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.